Thanks for joining us. Katherine is the Director of Science at Argonne National, or the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility at Argonne National Lab, and she's going to talk about the ALCF allocations program. So take it away, Katherine, when you're ready.
Thanks, Colleen. Hi, everybody. So this is sort of perhaps a much lighter talk in terms of technical details than you've been getting in the past few days, but we find it really valuable to give everyone an overview of what programs we have at the facility and why we have them. In particular, the general trajectory that we encourage projects to consider in terms of using the facility. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I want to touch on these. I'll give you some things to think about, give you some places to maybe go look, and sort of maybe trigger some questions regarding where you might want to do your research. So, as you know, the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, the goal is to provide world-class computing resources. And really, the mission is that we are to provide researchers substantially more, order of magnitude more computing resources than they would be able to access at many other computing sites. And we do this as a national user facility, which also means that all of the work is fully open science, so that we expect work done on the systems to be published with proper acknowledgements, etc. We have multiple different types of computational science that we support. You've already gotten, I'm sure, an earful about all of these, right? But as you consider sort of the different pillars of computational science and the type of work that science tends to be tackling on computers, they tend to fall into sort of a simulation space, data, or learning space. And all of these are supported on our resources and actively supported through all of our allocation programs. The general breakdown for all of the production systems that we have, and this will be true for Aurora as it will be a production system, is that the bulk of our time, 60% of the time, goes to the Insight program, which is really our flagship program. And this is where there's no, I'll get into the details of it, but really no agenda in terms of what areas of research can apply. You don't have to have any particular funding source. You don't have to be located in the United States. Anyone can apply to compete for time with an Insight. 30% of the time on these resources belongs to our sponsors, the Oscar program in the Office of Science. They run with most of this 30%. Really, lately, it's an allocation of 20%. Of the system, they support a program called the Argonne Leadership Computing Challenge that has a little bit more of a DOE focus. And as I said, I'll get into all of these. And then 10% of the system is for directors' discretionaries. And really, these are sort of our jumpstart projects. This is where people come in and ramp up and get forwarded. And this is kind of the overview slide. I am not walking through this slide in detail, but I have always found this to be a useful reference. You can have the PDFs of these slides, they're uploaded, but this just gives you the overview and sort of the quick comparison between these three programs, which really do account for all the time on the resource. And I will pop into all of these in detail. I think the biggest takeaway from this slide and doing the comparison is that Insight is targeted at bigger awards. So there are fewer projects with bigger slices of the system, and we expect a lot of readiness to use the system. So we really need those teams to have already done some work to be ready to go relatively quickly and understand what they're doing on the resources. ALCC, the projects tend to be a little bit smaller with a similar readiness, but not quite as strict. And DD, there is no readiness criteria. Really, it's if you have a good reason to start trying to use the leadership computing facilities, we'll help you and we'll get you some time. So to dig a little bit deeper, as I mentioned, the discretionary time is really a first step allocation for folks. It is relatively small, so like tens of thousands on Theta in terms of node hours, and they tend to be short-lived. So they tend to have those hours be allocated for 3 to 6 months, very easily renewable time, right? So you don't have to be done and off the system in 3 to 6 months, but we have that shorter time so that time doesn't sit completely unused, but also so that we can check back in with you. When you're applying for DD, which is a very quick process on our website, There's a small form to fill in. We ask you why you're applying for a discretionary account. So are you just trying to get ported and see if you can use the facility to do your science, just to see what's possible? Or are you thinking about an Insight Award or ALCC? You're trying to run some tests for those proposals, something like that. And so in those windows of, say, the 3 to 6 months of the renewable time, this is when we really want to touch base and see if you're making progress or if you need some help. But fundamentally, right, this is kind of the beginning of the pipeline. This is where you'll get started if you are considering how you might transition to an Insight or an ALCC award. So a little bit about the ALCC program. As I mentioned, our sponsors in the Department of Energy run this. So this is run entirely by Oscar. It is still focused on open science, but there is a mission component to it. So in the ALCC program, they are looking for projects that align with DOE priorities. I will say that does not necessarily mean that you have to be DOE funded, but it does mean that it aligns with the priorities of DOE. And that's been proven true, right? There have definitely been ALCC awards for projects that don't have DOE funding. They're just completely in line with interests that DOE has at that particular year. They're one-year awards, so there's no multi-year requests for the ALCC program, and they are approximately 1 million note hours, but this is, you know, an average with a big range and in terms of the min and the max. And that this is partly related with the fact that the readiness requirements for ALCC are a little bit less. So if this is something that's interesting to you, the proposal cycle for ALCC starts very soon. In November, we expect the call for the next ALCC year to open. The year goes, like the year for ALCC isn't a calendar year, like from January to December. It is instead shifted by 6 months. So it starts the beginning of July, ends on the end of June, and the following year. So the ALCC call opening in November will be for the 2023-2024 ALCC year. The other thing to keep in mind for ALCC is that they're looking for letters of interest first. So the first part of that process is write a letter of intent. I'm sorry, not a letter of interest, a letter of intent. And then they filter those down to ask for proposals. And really, this is driven by them looking for that relevance to the DOE mission. All right, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about Insight. And the reason I'm going to talk more in detail about Insight is, one, we run this program. I can talk and answer questions about ALCC, absolutely, but in the end, it is a much smaller fraction of our resource, and we don't run it. However, the Insight program, I would like to apologize, as there is a wailing cat, and I have locked her out, but she's still wailing, and I'm pretty sure the microphone will pick her up pretty soon. So my apologies. So Insight is run by the ALCF and our sister facility, Oak Ridge, the ALCF. We jointly run this. And this is why I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail, along with the fact that it allocates a far larger fraction of the system and is our flagship program. As I mentioned, anyone is eligible to apply for Insight. It is a more in-depth review process, which I'll pick apart in a couple other slides. And we're really looking at much larger potential awards. So say on Theta, this is 1 to actually probably more like 3 million as we're going into sort of Theta's last year in terms of the note hours for the awards, but basically very large fractions of the system, and 1 to 3 years for the proposal. So you could have potentially a 3-year proposal where you go through a renewal process instead of a new proposal review each year. This gives you a sense of what's on the table with Insight. So the award process for 2023, so next year, is already in process. We will be announcing the winners of the awards in early November of this year, and this is really what was on the floor for this allocation year. So it was 5 resources, which is a lot, and we won't really see that again, because both Summit and Theta will retire at the end of 2023. So in 2024, you'll be looking at Polaris and Aurora at the ALCF and Frontier at Oak Ridge, with pretty large award sizes, all things considered. So when you're contemplating whether you want to apply for Insight, I think it's really valuable to understand what are the criteria, what are we thinking about when we're looking at these proposals. The primary thing we are looking for, and to be eligible for Insight, is your scientific merit. It's really looking at research campaigns that have the potential for significant impact in your domain or in your community. Impact is widely defined here. It can be that there's an answer your community's been looking for a long time and you're going to provide that answer, but it also be there's a tool your community needs or a database that your community needs. It's a very broad range, and in part, right, it's the goal in the proposal to actually make that case of why it is impactful. The second criteria for Insight is that you have some need to use the leadership computing facilities, right? That you could not do this work elsewhere. So you're asking for, potentially a proposal worth many, many millions of dollars. And we want to understand, why does it need to be here? Why could it not be something that needs to happen elsewhere? A common question that comes up with this is, okay, maybe I could run this someplace else, but it might take me 6 years to run it. Instead, I could get this done in 6 months at ALCF. And that's actually a completely reasonable argument for why you might need leadership computing to do your problem. The key thing there is, when you are making your scientific case in your proposal, that you explain why this answer needs to be sooner rather than later, right? Some things, there is no time pressure, but let's say you are doing, looking for some answer related to an experiment, and the experiment needs that answer, it's a big ongoing experiment. You might actually be targeting that, and you need this answer in a particular time frame. Finally, the final eligibility criteria is just that anyone can apply. Grant allocations of any source are allowed. Non-US based researchers are welcome to apply. Industry is welcome to apply. There's no limits there. There's no even limit based on any country you the PI might be based in. It's just that at some point we also run into issues like even getting members of countries that have been listed as state sponsors of terrorism to get on the system, and that's just the one we say to folks, if there's any engagement in the proposal with participants from that from those countries, to just give us a holler before you submit the proposal, so we can tell you whether there's any chance of getting on the system or not. Okay. The other thing, as I mentioned, is that Insight has a much more detailed review process than even the ALCC program. The primary review process is looking at the scientific merit. This is the most important one. It is the one that really drives the awards, and everything else is kind of a filter, like a sanity check or a risk assessment. So here we are looking at the scientific or technical merit, whether you're using appropriate methods, like whether your approach to solving the problem is one that is sensible or innovative or exciting, whether you've got the right team working on this, and whether the request for the resources is commensurate with the problem that you are trying to solve, both perhaps because of the methods you're using, but also even like the value perhaps of that potential problem you're working on for your community. The second review that all proposals go through is a computational readiness review. So the scientific impact is done by peer review panels. So we have panels that review all the proposals. We get three science experts to review every single proposal, and we really have group conversations and panel conversations about the proposals. The computational readiness review is done by the leadership computing facility staff members. What we are looking for here is the technical readiness to go. I sort of mentioned this earlier, right? Have you been on the systems? Have you run the problem you're interested in? Do you actually understand exactly how much time it will take, or approximately how much time it will take? These are the kinds of things we're looking for. It's really looking to see how much time, say, do you think it will take before you're up and running that problem that you've put into the proposal. And as I said, like you can think of this as a bit of a risk assessment, right? So we're assessing whether you're ready to go on day one or whether you will need some help to be ready to go 6 months in. It does not, the high risk doesn't necessarily mean there's no chance. It just means that we have to understand the risk going into the awards. As I mentioned, you can do multi-years with Insight. So this includes renewals. I'm sorry, this includes, so the review process also includes renewals. And in this process, it's a little bit different. So when you are a renewal proposal, you do not go through sort of the same science and technical merit review. The panels are really looking to make sure that you have stayed on target with what your original proposal included, that you're making reasonable progress on the milestones that you proposed, that sort of thing, right? They're making sure that you're still going, because the one thing we try to avoid with renewals is where people try to fold in new scope to the proposal or change scope dramatically. And when that is the case, we like to have a conversation before even proposals or renewals are submitted to talk about whether this needs to be a new proposal or whether it is still consistent with the original one. And similarly with the computational readiness, we're sort of really making sure that everything's on track. Actually, I'll back up for a second so you're aware what happens once we have those two review processes done is we look at those proposals that have the highest merit, that have this highest scientific merit. And then we look at those proposals, which proposals have the highest readiness, are the most ready to go, combined with, what resources, people resources we have to help. And that award decision is done by the Insight Committee, and that is the directors for the 2 LCFs, the program manager for Insight, and the directors of science for Insight, for the facilities. So this gives you a picture. Of course, the resources are switching a lot over the course of the next, between last year, this year, and next year. But it gives you a sense, say, on the resources on the floor today, what kind of awards we were looking at. So on Summit, at the ALCF, there were 37 awards, 17 on Theta last year, which was actually a pretty big number considering the smaller size of the resource, and 11 on Polaris. So that's probably about right for Polaris, even though it was only available for part of the year, although we will have more hours available in 2023 on Polaris. It'll be closer to 2 million. And this gives you the sense of the total award sizes, right? So Summit really is coming out to be about $500,000 per project. That does not mean every project is $500,000, I should say, but in terms of average and median. So there are absolutely projects that go up to say 1 million Summit node hours. Same thing on Theta, right? We're at around this 1 million node hours on average, but really you're looking at, anywhere from 500 to 200 plus, 2 million plus node hours. And Polaris, I think these numbers will stay about the same going into next year. 200, we're going to probably get a little bit higher in terms of average award size, closer to the 200s, I would say. So some recent trends or changes, I would say, in Insight to keep in mind, as we've sort of already mentioned, the facilities strongly supports all 3 of these different pillars of doing science. Insight also does, right? And there's a lot of different ways of using a leadership facility, a commuting facility that a data science project versus a sim project might have. So these are very welcome in Insight. All kinds of workflows are welcome in Insight. It's still just meeting that criteria of needing leadership computing facilities for some reason or another. Another relatively new thing, it was new last year and could be relevant for folks in the room, is that we have an early career track. And so in this case, we are committing up to 10% of the Insight resources to those in their first 10 years of getting their PhD. And really our take on this is that we want early career researchers. We want people who are going to be thinking about large scale computing for their career engaged. We want them to feel like there's a landing place and that they have a chance of competing against, perhaps even their previous advisor as they're starting out their career. So there's nothing special in particular you have to do to be part of the early career track. If you qualify, it's just as you're working on your proposal, there's sort of a box saying, yes, I am in my early career. I got my PhD this year. And this is why this work would be really important for my career. So as I mentioned, this slide is really the summary of almost everything I'm talking about here. Some things to consider. The insight call always opens in the spring, so the next insight call will open in April 2023. There is the new call for the next ALCC year opening in the course of the next few weeks. The discretionary time is always open, so you can always apply for a discretionary project to get started and to explore, to continue your work that you're doing here at the workshop. So that's always feasible it's always open for awards. And that's it. That's all I had today.